All right, welcome to our first topic here, topic 1.1. This corresponds with chapter 1 in the textbook, and we're going to be looking at management as a job and management as a function in an organization. What is management? What is a manager? What do they do? So we'll cover what managers are and what they do. Part of that will include looking at what's called the 4 basic functions of management. Just a brief overview in this case, because we'll be deep diving into them in weeks 3 to 6. Different kinds of managers. What's a top manager? What's a middle manager? The roles of a manager. What roles do they have to fulfill? Maybe outward facing or inward facing in the organization. The skills of a manager. What skills does a manager need to have to do the job well? Is management a science or an art? To what extent can we talk about laws of management, or to what extent is it really just sort of an art that needs to be made in the moment with best decisions we can make with the information we have at the time? And how do people become managers? If you're taking this course, that might be why you're here. I want to become a manager. I want to get that good job. We'll talk about how some of the routes that people take to become managers in organizations. So what is managing? It's a topic that gets made fun of a little bit, maybe the topic of some humorous Dilbert cartoons that you may have seen in the paper, or if you've seen a movie like Office Space, the middle manager is often the topic of jokes and ridicule, sort of asking people to do tasks that don't make any sense and not being very helpful. But what is it really? Well, first of all, we need to start off with the fact that managers are individuals who work in organizations, and an organization is a group of people working together towards a common goal. If you don't have more than one person, you're not really an organization, and can't really say that you're managing anything. You're just maybe self-employed or just doing your own thing. But as soon as you get a bunch of people together, you need to be organized. And managers, that's one of the 4 roles of a manager is this organization. Management as an activity or as a set of activities is directed towards deploying the resources of the organization to achieve the goals of that organization in an efficient and B, an effective manner. We'll put those 2 words in our pocket here and return to them in a second. But in terms of resources, that's really a key point too, is that managers are essentially entrusted to deploy the resources of the organization towards those goals. Well, what kind of resources might those be? Well, all organizations have 4 basic types of resources that they get from the environment. First one is the people. Like we said, an organization has to be a group of people for it to be called something like an organization. And so you've got the labor and the talent of those people that need to be directed and deployed efficiently by the manager. The manager sets his employees' tasks and supervises those tasks of the other individuals who work for the firm. There's financial resources. Managers are often allocated budgets or even help prepare those budgets and are entrusted with spending the firm's capital towards the goals of that organization. There's the physical resources, of course. If we think about a place like Starbucks has physical locations. Starbucks has equipment, coffee makers. It has the inventory, the coffee itself that it sells. Managers oversee the use and steward those physical resources. And then finally, there's information. Managers, maybe the biggest part of the manager's job is processing the information that they're receiving from customers, from their supervisors and superiors, maybe from shareholders, and maybe from the staff they manage. And managers have to take all that information and use it to inform decisions and make the best decisions that they can. So we said management should be efficient and effective. Well, what do we mean by that? Aren't they just 2 words that mean the same thing? Well, not quite. Efficiency really has to do with reducing waste in the way that we're using it. Using those resources as well as possible. A manager will be given a budget and they need to stay within that budget and still achieve the goals of the organization. So there's that efficiency aspect, but maybe sitting above that, if we step back, take a step backwards, really there's the whole question about the effectiveness of that use of resources as well. We might be doing the wrong thing in a very efficient way. Elon Musk might tell the car division at Tesla, to make electronic vehicles as efficiently as possible, but they might go and make horse buggies as efficiently as possible. They might make them at the lowest possible cost, very high quality horse buggies, but there's no market for horse buggies. So that would not be an effective use of those resources. Their boss would come and say, great, I'm really glad you made these at such a low cost and you didn't waste anything, but this was completely ineffective. There's no market, there's no demand for it. It wasn't an effective use of those resources, even if it was efficient. So efficient, no waste, effective, the best decision about where to deploy the resources in the first place, you might say. So our 4 basic management functions that we'll be deep diving into starting in week 3. The first one is planning and decision making. Planning really is what happens before, if you think about it that way. We sit down, we make a plan, we decide how we're going to accomplish the strategy of the organization. Maybe we even set that strategy depending on what level we're sitting at as a manager in the organization. We decide how to achieve those goals. And then there's also decisions to be made both in that planning process, but also along the way. Things come up that maybe couldn't be planned for perfectly. Decisions need to be made all the time for a manager. A manager is really someone who makes decisions all the time. So there's that preemptive stage and then the decision making along the way both go into the manager's role. We'll look at that in week 3. Organizing in week 4. How should we structure the organization? Some of these organizations, some of these companies, I think Tata Group is something like 800,000 staff globally. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of resources. And in order to use that in a way that won't just be chaos, a lot of thought needs to go into the organization. How are we going to structure this organization so that lines of communication are efficient and effective and resources aren't lost or wasted or stolen? We can monitor that and control that. Further down the list here. Week 5, we're going to look at leading. Part of a manager's job is to lead, and that involves all sorts of things, but really a lot of that's to do with the people side. How can we get members of the organization all working on the same page towards the same objective? How can we inspire? How can we lead by example? Great CEOs are almost always great leaders as well, great leaders of people. They inspire people towards a vision. And then week 6, lastly, controlling. How do we monitor our progress? Peter Drucker is a famous management scholar of the last century. It probably wasn't him who said this, but it's attributed to him. If you can't manage it, you can't, or if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I love that saying. If you can't measure something, how do you manage it? How do you know how you're doing if you have no way of measuring your performance? So how do we measure our performance and how do we monitor our performance towards the attainment of that goal? How do we know we've hit the goal if we haven't defined what success looks like and how we'll measure that success? Here's a little graphic of those 4 basic management functions. And there is, to some extent, a rational cycle here, right? We plan and make decisions, then we organize, then we lead the staff towards that objective. And then lastly, we're controlling and monitoring things on the way, checking that everything's working the way it should. And that's reflected in this graph here on the solid arrows. But the truth of the matter, of course, is a manager might be managing multiple different activities, multiple different goals, and actually it's all feeding into each other at the same time. It's kind of like a football team that might have a plan, or a sports team that has a plan for the game and maybe even has some plays and a playbook that they put into play. But of course, things happen and you have to pivot, you have to make in-the-moment decisions and keep revising that plan iteratively. So while there is a logical order conceptually to these 4 activities, the truth of the matter is, of course, that a manager might do all 4 of them at once or in the same day or in a different order, right? Depending on how things pan out as time unfolds. So let's talk a bit about levels of management, this phrase. What's a middle manager? What's a top manager? Well, of course, it really just has to do with where they sit in the organization. We tend to just to broadly talk about top, middle, and first line management. And within those categories, top managers, as you might assume, are at the top of the organization. They're calling the shots. They have the most authority besides the owners themselves. And they manage the overall organization. Chief executive officer. Usually we talk about the C-suite or the top executive sometimes. the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer. Nowadays, you'll see things like the chief technology officer, CTO, chief information officer, CIO. There's chief everything officer, C something O. There's tons of them, and depending on the type of the organization. But the thing that they have in common is they all sit at the top of the organization and will generally form the main decision-making body for that organization. They're the ones setting the strategy. That's really how you would define these individuals, as they set the firm's strategy and objectives, and those below them assist in carrying out that strategy that they've set at that top level. Middle managers, they're the ones who are often made fun of the most in pop culture. And they sit somewhere between these top managers and these line supervisors. And essentially, they take the orders from the top and are responsible for carrying them out down to the line managers. They might supervise and coordinate. They might manage managers still. So middle managers are often managers of managers. Things like maybe a plant manager or division head or an operations manager, someone that's overseeing some broadly defined area, but still has managers underneath him. And then finally, we have what we call first line managers. These are the individuals, kind of the easiest to think about in our day-to-day, maybe the shift manager at a Starbucks or a McDonald's that's on the ground. They're often doing the job themselves while simultaneously supervising others who are also doing those jobs. They're often the ones who do the training, who train the line staff. Really, they're close to the service or production of whatever the firm does to make money. They're there on the line, as the name implies, doing whatever is needed to drive the revenues of or achieve the goals of that organization at its front line. And many of you guys, maybe some of you are already first line managers, or you're that, but if not, maybe that's often the first step you would take in an organization into management would be, all right, you're really good at the job, whatever that is, you're a really good barista at Starbucks. Would you mind, now we're going to put you in charge of maybe training other baristas or managing a Starbucks location and delivering our services while supervising others who are also doing that job as well. So in addition to this hierarchical levels, there's also functional aspect to managers. So we can have top managers all the way from first line up to top management, but they'll often be within different areas, different functional areas of the term. What do I mean by functional areas? Well, you might have a marketing department and then all three levels of managers within marketing. You might have a chief marketing officer even. Financial managers, you might have frontline accountants or procurement officers, all the way up to supervisors, all the way up to a chief financial officer. So you'd have all three levels within finance. Same thing with operations, HR. So if you think about it, there's sort of a horizontal plane in terms of the level of hierarchy with top CEO at the top, then your middle managers, then your first line. But within that, there's also vertical segments depending on the different functions. You might have HR over here, you might have operations here, you might have finance over here. That's what you'll see when you look at an organizational chart for a company that you guys might have seen just in other classes. So these are the different functional areas kind of going left to right on the horizontal plane, and then your different hierarchies bottom to top. Different types, so I won't go into all of those, but these are all different types of managers, different functions, functional areas that managers might work in. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the roles of a manager. What roles do they serve within the organization? Well, there's these roles that are people-facing, if you like. There's the role managers are often figureheads. They face external partners of the organizations, maybe suppliers, maybe large client groups. When I was working at the bank, if I needed to go and meet a big client, I'd often bring my top VP, and he would come and meet the top VP of the organization I was dealing with, and represent our firm as in a leadership capacity, kind of the general of the organization. There's also an informational role that managers serve. They take up information, they collect information actively, but also receive it in an ad hoc basis. And they may then make communication to those outside the firm, to the partners, make decisions about products and services, maybe a tricky customer service decision that needs to be addressed by a manager, right? It's the typical conversation now, right? I want to speak to your manager, and hopefully the manager is able to make a decision there that's kind of come up to his or her level. They can also be the spokesperson within the organization when a decision, especially middle managers, if a decision's made by the CEO, middle managers often then are the ones who go out and disseminate that decision or that information out down to the lines. And then there's this decisional role, the entrepreneur. What do we want to go into a new line of business? Are we going to launch a new product? Disturbance handler. Has something happened in our environment that we need to respond to? Are we Boeing? Did we have a plane crash? Or are we having problems with our planes that we need to, sort of a crisis that we need to manage? A resource allocator. We're going to set the budget for this year and tell each department how much they get to spend. That's a management decision. Negotiator. Again, maybe those high-level business decisions need to go up the management tree, like me at the bank. I end up bringing in one of my top managers for a particularly big deal because the client is wanting something maybe more valuable to our company and more valuable to their company than I would normally deal with. I need to call in someone who has sufficient authority to speak on behalf of the company and make those negotiations because there's more at stake. My GIF isn't working here, but the skills of a manager. What skills? This is from a movie I really enjoyed, old movie called Napoleon Dynamite, where he's talking about how he needs to get some skills. But what skills do you need to have as a manager? First of all, there's the technical skills, perhaps. These may be very specific to the function or very specific to the industry. If you're a manager, an engineering manager at Boeing, you probably need to have an engineering degree and be very familiar with the engineering of aeroscience. If you're a manager at a hotel chain at Marriott, you need to know about the hotel industry and have those technical skills related to management in that area. So there's sort of the industry-specific technical skills that you need to have. Then there may also be functional skills within that industry. So perhaps you're an accountant, you're a tax accountant for the firm you work at in the finance department. You need to have technical skills. You need to know the tax code. So there's that technical aspect oftentimes to a management job. When I was in the bank, my manager was a banker as well. He'd done banking. I had a line manager who still did some banking himself. Then I had this VP who managed all the bankers, and he knew how to do banking. He knew how to do risk assessments and how to evaluate a credit risk with great technical skill. Next, there's interpersonal skills. So managers have to be able to speak with people and communicate well with people. It's both the best and the most challenging thing about being a manager. If you want to take on, my first job as a manager was taking on someone who was underperforming. It was a tricky situation. It happens all the time. It was a colleague who was underperforming quite significantly. And my manager said, hey, do you want a chance at promotion? You can be your colleague's manager, see if you can help get their performance back on track. And that's a very good challenge, but quite a difficult one. Managers need to be able to manage performance and improve the performance of their team and optimize the performance of their team. And that can take great tact and skill in dealing with other people. Interestingly, this is becoming even more important as artificial intelligence really starts to handle a lot of those technical aspects. I have some friends back in Calgary who do they own a video game studio. They run it. There's graphics designers, video game directors in this company. They've done some really big titles for Epic Games. And they said, you know what? Personal skills are even more important when you're working in these technical domains, and they just keep getting more important as AI is able to do more of the technical stuff. Being able to manage people well is extremely important. So that's a skill you really want to be working on. And don't underestimate the ability to communicate with others. And then there's this conceptual skill. This is harder to define. This is where it becomes more of an art than a science. The ability to think in the abstract, the ability to take information and apply the concepts and maybe lessons learned in the past to the decisions that are facing you, perhaps the use of next generation technology. How are we going to implement artificial intelligence at Starbucks? That might seem like a crazy question, but a manager needs to be able to visualize and see different possibilities, different scenarios, and assess maybe the risks and assess the benefits and the costs of implementing, for example, artificial intelligence technology, which requires this ability to think abstractly, not just in the mundane day-to-day, how much should I charge for a cup of coffee, but look a little bit down the road. They need to have diagnostic skills. They need to be able to make good decisions in the moment. They need to be able to see relationships between cause and effect. Hey, we changed our coffee, again, using the Starbucks example here. We changed our coffee supplier, and now we're not selling as much coffee. What's happening here? Or we changed our coffee supplier, now we're selling out of coffee. Maybe we can increase the price. They need to be able to use those diagnostic skills to make those decisions. Again, communication skills. So interpersonal might be with the staff within your organization. Maybe you need to communicate to a customer, to a client. You need to be good at writing emails. You need to be good at conveying your ideas well in meetings. It's a huge part of the job. Good. I'm not going to go into these in great detail here. Time management obviously is almost just hygiene, but that also means not just showing up to work on time, but the ability to prioritize your time. So you'll hear sometimes what's spoken of is what's important versus what is urgent, knowing which is which. Does this need to be done right now, or is it something that's important, but I have a month to address it? Doing the right thing at the right time is a big part of a manager's job, knowing what needs to be postponed, knowing which deadlines maybe have to be reconsidered and which ones need to be met. All the skills of a manager. So is it a science or an art? Well, the truth is it's a bit of both. There are aspects of management that a manager can take a scientific approach to. There may be clear causal relationships that are proven between, say, price and demand. It's pretty clear that to a certain extent, the higher you raise a price, that'll have a depressing effect on demand based on price sensitivity, which you might be familiar with from a microeconomics class. You can take a scientific approach to some of these decisions. Sometimes, though, it's more of an art. You may get, there's so many factors at play that managers will often have to rely on their intuition and their experience as well. That's part of management. That skill just comes by doing it a lot and knowing if a customer comes with this kind of problem or is in this kind of state of mind, experience will say, well, if I approach it this way, it's just going to make things worse. And I know from experience, because I've done it, if I do it this way, it'll defuse a situation. How do people become managers? Of course, there's many paths. I've known managers at the bank who I don't think even had a college degree and worked their way up from being a teller on the line all the way up to a really high position. Even actually our senior vice president for all of Western Canada was somebody who just started as a bank teller and worked her way up. Oftentimes, though, especially nowadays, it involves some kind of education in combination with that experience. So you guys are here, you're doing this accreditation. I actually started off doing an online accounting course. And for me, that was the start of a journey that led to a job in banking, which I'd really wanted. So well done if you're here, you're already on the right path. You'll need to probably, though, combine that with some experience. Nobody goes straight into a top management position without first learning the business, and that's something you can only do over time. Good. So that wraps up topic 1. In topic 2 for this week, so 1.2, we're going to be looking at management theory and the history of management. What can we learn from management theories? Is theory just this abstract thing that doesn't really apply to our everyday lives? Is history stuff that happened a long time ago and doesn't matter anymore? Henry Ford is quoted as having said history is bunk. Is that true? I would say probably not. His competitors at GM who overtook him during his tenure at Ford would have said, no, history is actually really important and we learn from it. So we'll see you in lecture 1.2 here. See you soon.